This year, Environment and Energy was one of the committees that I got to serve on and worked with Senator Marty, and I in no way, shape, or form question the sincerity of this individual. He believes what he believes, and he believes it passionately. However, today I must stand up and oppose this bill. As we look at what has occurred during the process and the many things that I have learned during the committee time, if we look back at the Renewable Energy Act that was put in place in 2007, we see a situation that was well thought out, that was actually studied for many years before any type of mandates were put in place. All of the participants at the table were invited to the table. They sat there, they discussed this, they worked it out, and then the legislation came into being and the mandates were put in place. As we look at that, there are a number of things to consider in putting out a mandate like this. You talk about the impact on the industry, you talk about demand growth, load growth, you talk about integration into the distribution network, all of these things, none of which have been fully vetted here in the issue as it relates to a solar mandate. Now in this case, in this particular bill with House File 956, we're actually just doing it all backwards. We're going to go ahead and establish the mandate, and then we're going to go do the studies. Growing up on the farm, that would have been comparable to studying how to close the barn door after the horse is out. In the process, I have managed to hear this bill in 2 different committees. And in the process, as this bill has moved on, what we have seen, we have started to see certain groups carved out. We have seen the cooperatives carved out, we have seen municipals carved out, we have seen large utility or large industry accounts in the Northeast carved out. Well, the reality of it is now we're back to where, well, we primarily just have investor-owned utilities that are involved. Now, I appreciate the fact that these other entities are being carved out because I have a lot of cooperative customers in my district. I have a lot of municipal customers in my district, but I also have Xcel Energy customers, and I also have Otter Tail Power customers. And as we look at this, as we know, the service territories are not really nice and neat. They sort of gerrymander around however things were put together. And so on one side of the section, we're going to have a farmer who is an Otter Tail customer, and he gets to pay for the increased costs of this mandate. However, the cooperative customer on the other side of the section doesn't get to pay. You know, what is right about that? We're going to see our municipal customers that don't have to pay for this, but their Xcel neighbors outside the city limits, they are going to have to pay for this. What's fair about that? You know, and I asked the question, and I don't really expect anyone to answer, but the truth is we all know the answer. The answer is nothing is right about that. Nothing is fair about that. And yet we've seen these groups carved out. And along with those groups that are carved out, obviously every time we carve out a group, we also carve out a little bit of opposition, and I know that that's how bills get pushed through. I want to tell you two stories. Stories about individuals. One is Colleen. Colleen is a single mother. She has worked hard to try and keep her family afloat. She works in one of the houses that house some of our disabled, our developmentally disabled. She's one of that group of workers that, quite frankly, we can't quite find the money for increased salaries when we're spending a couple $2 billion of extra money in our budget this year. But now we're expecting her to pay more in her utility bill. And I also want to talk to you about Helen. Helen is a 90-year-old widow. She's been retired for a number of years, but she worked hard in her life, and one of her projects was she always managed to take a little bit of her earnings and she would buy utility stock. And as I was working with her, the reason she had this utility stock was that someday when she retired, she could take her dividends and pay her utility bills so that she didn't have to dip in her Social Security to help pay her way. Now today, Helen doesn't pay individual utility bills. You see, she has now progressed to a point where she's in an assisted living complex. So her utility bills go to help her pay her rent. You know, now the utilities are faced with this. If you're an investor-owned utility, do I raise the rate on Colleen or do I cut the earnings for Helen? That is That is the very real question that we have. And the reality of it is we all have Colleen's, Madam President. We all have Helens in our individual districts, all across this state. Some of them are going to be excluded from this, some of them are not. From Appleton to Apple Valley, from Grand Rapids to Coon Rapids, from Red Lake to Red Wing, from Austin to Anoka, we're going to have Colleen's and Helens that are either going to have to pay more or they're going to have to earn less. Again, what is right and what is fair about that? You know, in closing, just let me say this. I wish to address all the members, Madam President, but I address us freshmen who came in this year. I think we, as everyone else, heard from people, you know, if you get there, do things differently than they've been done in the past. Don't go ahead and pass laws in the same old way, going ahead and cutting out this group, cutting out that group, making a deal to get this support, making a deal to get that support, and yet, Madam President, that's indeed what we have here. You know, and as one of the larger groups of freshmen who have come into this body, we actually have an opportunity to do things differently. We actually have an opportunity to say no to this bill. We do not approve of the carve-outs. We do not approve of accepting this business but not that business, saying that this business is more important than this other business is. We have an opportunity to do things differently. And so I urge all of you to vote against this bill. Number one, it is a costly bill. We can talk about the minute percentage of a mandate that is there, but the reality of it is that it will cost hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to the ratepayers all across this state. And the reality of it is, further, that it is not being allocated in a fair manner. I urge you again, please vote no.